Hey nerds, what's up? Today I'm going to give you a recommendation on every type of fantasy so that you can find your next read for exactly what you feel like reading. Now, in a few of these categories, some of my favorite books are the most well-known and popular books. So while I will be recommending them, in those cases I will also be hopefully recommending a lesser known follow-up that you may not have heard of before. So let's get into it. First up, we've got epic fantasy and high fantasy. Now, these are often used interchangeably, especially because epic fantasy is usually high. It's kind of like the rectangle and the square. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. That's kind of how epic and high is. So for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna have my epic recommendations be the really sprawling lots of book recommendations, or my high fantasy will either be something like a trilogy, smaller stakes, or a standalone. So if we're gonna start with epic fantasy, the thing is, my two favorite epic fantasies are my two favorite series of all time, and they are A Song of Ice and Fire and Stormlight Archive. I think these books are famous for a reason. They're excellent, and they are my first recommendations if you haven't read either one of them. Just a quick talk about a couple of them. So the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, it just finished its first half. So this will be a planned 10 books, but they're in 2 arcs, books 1 through 5, and then books 6 through 10, and book 5 just came out. So this is a perfect time to get into the series if you haven't gone into it. If you love chunky books with slow character development and lots of epic moments that really are incredibly emotionally impactful, the Stormlight Archive is for you. Next up, we have A Song of Ice and Fire, which everyone knows, Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. It's incredible, and some of you, you're gonna slide into my comments and say, yeah, but it'll never be finished. Shh, I don't care. And honestly, neither should you. This is my favorite thing I've read in over a decade. I fell in love with it when I read it the last couple of years for the first time, and you are really just selling yourself short if you don't let yourself experience the magnificence that is the first 5 books in A Song of Ice and Fire. If you like intense character development, amazing character voice, darker yet still hopeful narratives, this is the one for you. Whether you've watched the show, whether you haven't, do it. Also, some of you are gonna say that this is low fantasy, and I don't agree. It's high. Now that we've got those 2 very well-known recommendations out of the way, I am going to try to hype up a different epic fantasy, which is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I absolutely love this series. Ken Liu is one of my favorite authors. I have read almost everything he has published so far. I'm missing like 1 book, but I love his incredibly thoughtful writing and his theme-heavy works. The Dandelion Dynasty is epic in nature because it follows several generations, and it's very unique in that its magic system is mostly engineering, which is something that obviously really appeals to me as an engineer. I just love the unique character work in this, and it's just something very different than a lot of the other epic fantasies I've read, and I think it's highly underrated, and it's complete. It's 4 books, so if you want a series that is done, I highly recommend Dandelion Dynasty. Next up, for my high fantasy picks that aren't epic, I guess, I'm gonna go first with The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. I am in love with this novel. It is a standalone, and it follows a mother and her journey of giving up her past once she became a mother, and the complicated feelings she has about that. It is a sword story, with magic, and I just fell in love with the complicated depictions of family and motherhood, particularly because the main character is a mother, but parenthood in general, and grief and nationalism, and there's just a lot that is really wrapped up in here. I do worry sometimes when I pitch this as like a deep view of motherhood that people will immediately be turned off if they are not parents themselves or particularly mothers, but I am positive you can enjoy this for any reason. I think you will deeply connect with the characters regardless, and it's just an excellent story all around. For one more high fantasy recommendation, I would go with The Life Ship Traders by Robin Hobb. Now, If you don't know, this is actually a trilogy, the Life Ship Traders trilogy, that is technically part of a wider The Realm of Elderlings series with many different trilogies together. Now, while The Realm of Elderlings is clearly epic because it spans a lot of time and a lot of places, you can, in my opinion, just read this trilogy alone, and so it is smaller in scale. I might be cheating a little bit, putting it under just the high fantasy and not epic, but here's the thing. Life Ship Traders is incredible. Again, if you're going to sense a theme in the books I like, amazing characters that I feel so strongly about, and ships that are alive, which sounds weird, but works super well in the context of the story, and just a lot of exploration of destiny and what you do with your life and the choices you make. And if you want to feel really strongly about a villain that you will hate more than anybody else, this is the book for you. Next up, my urban fantasy recommendation, which is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, starting with Jade City. I absolutely love this trilogy. It is kind of set in like a pseudo 70s kind of style, mafia with magic. The Greenbones are different clans that are able to use jade, which is their magic, and they kind of rule their city because of the different factions and kind of wars within it. Again, characters that are deeply flawed but lovable, a super fast-paced story that will keep you completely invested, and also a little bit of an epic nature as there are some generational characters at play. Overall, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this series and it is totally warranted. The other fun thing about this series, if you are a physical book person, there's just a ton of editions out right now that are very pretty, much prettier than this original edition, I will say. I understand that this isn't the most exciting of covers, but the book within is amazing, and it's a great time to buy the physical series if you're a physical reader. Next up, cozy fantasy. And my recommendation first is going to be a classic one, which is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Now, I'm going to just say it. I went into this book super skeptically because I have read several cozy fantasies, and they're not just, I'm more of an epic high girl. The cozy low stakes isn't necessarily my favorite, but I heard so much buzz around this that I went into it really expecting not to like it, which is a rude way to enter a book, and instead was just completely charmed, completely blown away. This was a book that was like, oh, I kind of get why someone would like a cozy book. So if you're like me and don't usually trend towards the cozy, you might want to give this one a try because it's just charming. It feels like a warm hug when you read it, in the best possible way. For perhaps a little lesser known cozy, I am going to go with Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater, which is a very funny book that was actually the winner of SPFBO one of the years that I was a judge, which is a indie fantasy showcase. So this is an indie book. And my only criticism of this one that I want to warn you about, like the only thing that made me not like it less, because I highly enjoyed this book. I thought it was very funny and charming. It's extremely inspired by Good Omens. So I loved Good Omens, but this is like really like almost like an homage to Good Omens. It really relies on that. Like you can tell how much it takes from Good Omens. So I just want to warn you about that if that's something that would bother you. However, if you like that book, then you'll probably like this. It's basically Good Omens with the cozy lower stakes, much more interpersonal, but it is a great read, and I do highly recommend it. Next up, Grimdark, and this is my basic recommendation. I'm sorry, it's got to be Joe Abercrombie and the First Law series, particularly you can start with the First Law trilogy, which is The Blade itself. My favorite trilogy, part of this series is the second trilogy. You do have to read a lot of books to get there, but it's worth it, I promise you. The thing about Abercrombie and why I like him, I don't naturally gravitate towards super grimdark. A lot of the grimdark I've read have just been too dark for me, where I feel like I'm really wallowing in just the worst possible scenarios. It just doesn't always feel great for me. The thing I love about Abercrombie is that undeniably grimdark. However, he has so much humor. Is there a funnier author writing today than Abercrombie? I don't know if there's an author I laugh out loud more in than Abercrombie's books. Like, he is a master at character voice and actually just being so witty. And because of that, I think it brings a levity to his grimdarkness that makes it bearable. I also never feel like Abercrombie is punishing his characters to punish him. It never feels to me that Abercrombie's sitting down and thinking, what's the worst, most depraved thing I can think of? And sometimes when I read other Grimdark, I feel that way. So if you are a skeptical Grimdark person, I would give Joe Abercrombie a try for those reasons. Now, he does have a new series out, and that could be a good place to try because I think this is only going to be a trilogy, so it's a little smaller, First Lost 10 books. And that's The Devils. Now, if you've seen my review, you know The Devils was only okay for me. However, I truly do believe it's because I had incredibly high expectations because I just came off, a 10-book series that had all of this time to develop. Almost everyone I know who hadn't read Abercrombie in a while, or this was their first Abercrombie, really enjoyed it. So I think this could be a great entry to his works. So I will say that as well. But yeah, just give Joe Abercrombie a try in general. Next up, we're going to talk about the classics. So the fantasy that are classics, and the obvious answer is the only right answer here, which is The Lord of the Rings. I love The Lord of the Rings. I guess my only pitch here is if you've only seen the movies and you haven't read it, it's totally worth the read. I was in your shoes. I actually grew up watching the Lord of the Rings movies first, and it wasn't until I was adult where I was like, I guess I should read the books. And I actually didn't expect, I thought I was going to like the movies more. I'm just going to be honest. That's what I thought. And instead, I was like crying at The Return of the King. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever read. There are things in the books that add so much to the movies. Still, the movies are incredible too. But if you haven't taken the plunge, I highly recommend it. But for a lesser known classic that you may not have heard of before, I'm gonna go with Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees. Now, this is a pre-Tolkienian fantasy. It was written in 1926, and a lot of different fantasy authors have named it as an inspiration. And so when I read it, I saw it. You are going to read this book and see so many people's inspirations, like for example, Susanna Clarke, who will be showing up on this list later, and many other authors. This is a very fairy tale-like classic, and again, so charming, so delightful, and I love reading the originals to works that have been so influential for other fantasy authors that I love. So highly recommend this little classic. Speaking of Susanna Clarke, next up, let's talk about historical fantasy / alt history. And my winner is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Yes, this one's a chunky one. Yes, it's a long read. Totally worth it. The premise of this novel is basically the history of Britain, but if there was magic, if it really existed. So it is a very grounded look at what would the world look like if there was magic. And just the nerd in me absolutely is blown away by how realistic Clarke's writing feels in this. Now, my recommendation for this, if you feel intimidated, because it is an intimidating book, is to not treat it like a regular book you're going to sit down and binge. When I read this book, I think I read it slowly over an entire month, and I read other books concurrently with it, like shorter books that I was finishing maybe quicker, and I just kind of took my time and took it slowly, and I found it such a fulfilling read in that way. So if you've bounced off this in the past before, because it is a slower book, it can read like a history book, which is, for me, part of its charm. I would just recommend reading it a little slower, take your time with it, but nothing has come close in alt history for me than this. Okay, let's do Portal Fantasy, and my recommendation there is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. This was my favorite book of the year I read it. I think I read it in 2020, which is, I think, the year it came out. This is, I think the author herself says it is Narnia inspired, so you get to open doors, literally portals, into other worlds. And I particularly loved the writing in this novel. If you are somebody who really bounces off more flowery prose, this might not be for you, but I loved the way this was written and loved the main character and her journey through these different windows and was really transported, couldn't put it down. Highly recommend this for a kind of a different portal read. Next up, literary fantasy. Literary fantasy is the fantasy that self-important people like to pretend aren't fantasy, and so they shelf it in the literary fiction section of the bookstore. Not that I'm salty about that at all. Fantasy is good in literary too, just admit it. And this will be my repeat author on the list. And sorry, I'm not sorry. Susanna Clarke has only written 2 full-length novels, and they both deserve to be on this list. This is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a really strange novel, and I have read it several times. If people ask me what my favorite book of all time is, this is one of the contenders for me to say. And that's obviously, as a book lover, very difficult to say, like a single book. But I am obsessed with this book. It is an odd novel. I read it in 24 hours the first time I read it. And then I think the second time I read it in like 2 days too. Here's the thing. I don't want to say a lot about it because I think the less expectations you have going into this book, the better. So the only thing I will say is just don't worry when you start this book. When you start this book, you might think things like, do I need to keep track of this? The answer is no. Anything you need to keep track of will be told to you again. So just lay back, relax, and enjoy the show. And also enjoy that this is a pretty short fantasy, which is rare. I would love, maybe at the end for fun, I will tally the page count I have told you to read here. Piranesi. Next up, we got Comedic Fantasy, and obviously the king of Comedic Fantasy is Terry Pratchett with Discworld. It is funny, it's satirical, it satirizes so much. It satirizes the fantasy genre, some of them it satirizes politics, the movie industry. There's one for everything. Journalism. You gotta at least try Pratchett. I just have 2 of my favorites here, which are Guards and Weird Sisters. The cool thing about Discworld is you can pretty much start anywhere. There are different tracks. These are on 2 different tracks. This is the Witches track and this is the City Guard track. 2 of my favorites, but for a little maybe lesser recommended funny fantasy, I actually want to go with The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I am sure many of us, at least if you're around my age, grew up with The Princess Bride, the movie. I did. It was one of my favorite movies. Still kind of is. I watched it a billion times. So I don't know what possessed me to pick this up 6 or 7 years ago. And then it's hilarious. It's just as hilarious as the movie, if not more so in a lot of ways. It does something very different in the book than in the movie. And I think if you love the movie, again, it's another book that's super worth the read. So that's my recommendation. Next up, Flintlock Fantasy. And I'm just gonna fully admit, guns in my fantasy, it's not my favorite. I don't go seeking out after it. Just full disclosure. However, I really loved Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was actually my first of his I've read. I definitely want to read more because he's obviously a huge name in the genre. But again, Guns is in the title, and I still loved it. Loved the character work in this novel, and it's kind of like someone pitched it to me. Leanna from Leanna's Library gave this to me, and let's see if I still have her note in here. Oh no, I do. She said if it's Pride and Prejudice, but if Lizzie went to war, which I thought was a very funny description and pretty apt. So the only thing I didn't love about this novel was the romance, which if you're not new here, that is no surprise because I'm not a huge romance person. But otherwise, I flew through this novel. It's a great Flintlock. Next up, Greek retelling. My favorite Greek retelling is Circe by Madeline Miller, which is the basic answer, but as I've told you, sometimes the basic answers are right. I've read a lot of other Greek retellings, and they always have a blurb that's like, the next Madeline Miller, and it's always a lie. I actually don't think I've read a single one that was really worth much, to be honest. I know there's other good Greek retellings. You can give me good examples, but I haven't read a ton that I loved. This one's worth it. Next up, magical realism. So my first magical realism pick is A Wild Sheep Chase by Haruki Murakami. I read this back in high school and it really was very profound for me. I loved the exploration, particularly of identity within this novel and kind of how it uses just like a touch of magical realism to bring that to pass. I have read several Murakamis, I think 4 or 5. I do have a complicated relationship with this author. You might have heard that he can be kind of misogynistic in the way he writes women, so that is something I do want to warn you of. I don't think it's quite as evident in this novel as others. It's there a little bit, but not as much. But I do want to admit that. However, this book has just been very profound for my life, and it means a lot to me, and so I always like to recommend it in the magical realism sector. A newer one to recommend that's a little bit more famous would be The Green Mile by Stephen King. I'm not super well read in Stephen King, but I read this last year, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. This is about a Well, it's about death row, and it has just like that touch of magic, again, for magical realism, that really made it just such an evocative read. Definitely very harrowing. This was not like an easy read by any means, but super satisfying, so a great magical realism pick. Okay, now we're on to LitRPG, and no one's gonna be surprised because I've really only read one LitRPG that I've fallen in love with, which is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. Just give it a try. I have a whole video pitching this, so if you wanna go see that, you can. If you love video games, if you love Dungeons and Dragons, if you don't love any of that but love laughing your head off, this is the one. This is the book for you. My quick caveats, it is very crass, so just be prepared for that. But it's funny, and the series gets better. I'd give it 2 books before you decide to quit. They're very short, quick reads. And also for audiobook readers, this is one of the most famous audiobooks. Like, people rave about the performance of the audiobook narrator, Jeff Hayes, so that's a good option for this one as well. Okay, horror fantasy. Admittedly, I haven't read a ton of horror. I kind of left some of these ones for the end of the ones that I am less well read in, like the subgenres. But I did kind of have one of my first experiences with a horror fantasy in the last couple of years that made me want to try more, so I can get some good recs from that. But that was A Song for the Void by Andrew C. Piazza. This is about a ship's crew who is fleeing pirates and come to kind of an island where they are hunted by something very supernatural. This was visceral for me. Like, it really gave me mounting dread, I remember is the word I described. Like, I just felt all of this existential dread that slowly built up over this novel. And I thought it was very cool the way it did that, because haven't read a lot of horror. So this is kind of a, I think, lesser known book. It is an indie book, so I think less people have heard of it, but I highly enjoyed it. Okay, and my last 2 subgenres are ones that I think are very big, but ones that I haven't read anything in. So I want to talk about them, which is first Romantasy. I haven't actually ever read a real Romantasy. I don't like romance, and so I'm very wary of it. I know it is a huge hole in my fantasy reading, so I am going to try to experience some Romantasy, not to like sit here and trash on it, because I just don't think that's very fun. Just so I can better understand what draws fantasy reader to that subgenre, so maybe I can be better at recommending things. So that said, the only pure romance in the SFF genre that I've read and enjoyed was a sci-fi, though it's like very soft sci-fi, so I'm just gonna include it, which is This Is How You Lose the Time War. And this is like, people either love or hate this book. I loved this book, and it is purely a romance. But it's my kind of romance, which is like all told through letters and very like about personality and stuff like that. Definitely not a romantasy. This definitely doesn't fit, but it's the closest thing. So here you go. And finally, dark academia, which I feel like is a rising subgenre that is getting a lot of attention. I don't think I've really read any, well, I've read a couple. I've read like a couple dark fantasy academia. Some I've read dark academia that's not fantasy at all. So I'm not well read in the genres, and I didn't really like anything I did read. So I'm just gonna cross out the dark part. My favorite fantasy academia book that's not dark in any way is definitely The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I love this book. I will say I didn't love the trilogy ending as much. I want to be up forward with that. It was only okay to me. Like, I gave it a 3.5 after this, like, being obsessed with this book. But I do think the first book is very satisfying, in my opinion, as a single read. So highly recommend The Book That Wouldn't Burn. This is like a special copy, so it doesn't have the title on it, which I realize is really annoying, but I'll put the real copy here so you can see it. But yeah, if you just want academia without the dark, this is a good one. So those are my recommendations for many of the subgenres of fantasy. One other question I get asked a lot that I don't think is actually like real subgenres of fantasy, in that they're kind of a different classification, is I get asked a lot about LGBTQ+ or non-European fantasy. So I want to talk about a couple of the ones I already mentioned that fall into either of those categories. So for LGBTQ+, Legends and Lattes, Small Miracles, and This Is How You Lose the Time War definitely fit that. You can also make an argument for Greenbone Saga. It's obviously not the focus, which I don't think people need it to be the focus, but one of the main characters is LGBTQ, and also could make an argument for the 10,000 Doors of January for the same reason, although it is much less of a plot point in 10,000 Doors of January. As far as non-European fantasy, Dandelion Dynasty, the Greenbone Saga, A Wild Sheep Chase, and The Sword of Kaigen all fit within that. And for one final recommendation that fits both of these, LGBTQ plus recommendation and non-European fantasy, I want to talk about this little novella, The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nivo. I really love Nivo, and she has, I forget what the overall title of these are. She has a little series of novellas. I think there's 4 of them out now, unless I've missed a recent release. But I love these little novellas. They didn't really fit anywhere else in my recommendation, but they're very charming, and it is non-European and non-binary rep. Let me know which ones of these you have read or which one of these piqued your interest. I'd love to know. I hope I gave you plenty of recommendations to keep your TBR full. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. According to YouTube, like 60% of my views come from non-subscribers. So if you think you'd be interested in even watching a second or third video from me, please subscribe. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading or other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.